Apple II forever, making life better and better. Apple II forever and ever, bringing the rainbow to you.
I think we're just going to get started. So this is the hardware panel, otherwise known as Stump the Chumps. And you can ask them any question in the world, and they will give you an answer.
Yes.
Okay, and then after that, we have Solder Fest. So stick around if you have things that you want to solder. We don't actually have any specific projects. We also don't have any equipment, so we're sort of relying on the audience to provide all that. But we are here to help out if you do have things that you want help on for soldering. But other than that, I'm just going to turn the mic over to Joe and Ron, and they can introduce themselves and just kind of go from there.
Hey everybody, how you doing? You enjoying KansasFest so far? We like it. Can I get a heck yeah? Yeah? Do it? Awesome. So my name's Joe Stroh-Snyder. This is Ron McAdams. I run a little thing called Joe's Computer Museum on the internet where I tinker with old computer hardware and things of that nature. Let's have Ron introduce himself real quick.
Well, I mean, you just introduced me,
Oh, okay.
so
Well,
that's
you know.
okay. But hey, everybody, it's Ron from Ron's Computer Videos. So I want to thank everybody on the KFest committee for all the hard work that they have done to make this event possible. I want to thank everybody that's sitting here in the audience today, and I want to thank people at home for taking time out of their Wednesday evening to spend it with us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the whole thing about this panel is to get questions from the audience about hardware, stuff about the Apple II or maybe even the Mac, or even just general repair questions, thoughts about diagnostics, anything like that at all, and see if we can figure it out. Maybe you'll be able to stump us. Maybe there will be prizes. There won't be prizes.
And not
But-
just computer stuff. If you've got questions about other things
Yeah.
like, are you putting too much salt in your grandma's tomato soup? The answer is yes, but we can probably help you diagnose those things too.
Anybody have anything they want to throw our way real quick? Come on now. Yes. Any ways to revive a CD drive in a computer? Very good question. This happens a lot in the Macintosh community too.
Yes.
Many times those old CD drives, what's happened is the tiny little surface mount capacitors have failed. And that causes lots of signal issues, power up issues, issues with the motors. So many times your first check, other than does it turn on and does the drive open? I mean, that's for the first step, is to then look at those capacitors and see if they're faulty. And you can tell that because they'll have stinky fish, smelly goo all over the place.
Yeah.
They'll leak all over the place. And many times those can be removed and then repaired. The downside is you got to dig into the hardware and do the repair on that. So. Yes. So. Chris, a really good suggestion. If you don't need the physical media, if you can get a disk image of the CD that you want to use, an alternative to repairing your CD drive is to replace it with something that can emulate a CD drive, like a BlueScuzzy, or I don't know if there's another solution out there that does that, but I know the BlueScuzzy does that. And if it's just like a SCSI CD-ROM drive, you can put an ISO or a toast file or something on that BlueScuzzy, connect it, and then it just replaces the CD drive, and then you don't have to worry about the disks anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, before we take any other questions, we've got someone else who's joined us here. I'm going to pass the mic down. Oh, we've got more people.
Here they
Even
come.
more people.
Yes.
Finally, hey.
So the real experts are here now.
Yes, we're
So I'm just gonna like take a nap now, if that's okay.
Here, I'm going to pass the mic down.
Hey, I'm DJ. A lot of y'all know me. You might have seen me on Facebook. Justin Scott's my name on Facebook. I go by DJ though.
I'm Sark. Most of you guys know me. Real name is Ian.
Yeah, the two of us run the repair / hangout room every year here. So yeah, if y'all have anything that's broken or you got questions or whatever outside of this, feel free to come by and talk to us.
They've got real reasonable rates too. It's you can typically just go in there and it's a kind word and a handshake, and these guys do some
Maybe a beer.
amazing work. Yeah, maybe a beer.
So y'all got started a little early and we were hacking on some stuff up there. So Paul came to grab us. I've missed any of the questions that y'all already asked or what y'all said, but only one? Yeah.
You didn't miss it by too
So,
much.
I mean, I guess that's what this was supposed to be, right? A Q&A type session or bounce stuff off of us or, yeah. So anybody got questions?
More questions?
Could you guys please repeat the entire question?
Oh, so what you've got,
So for the people listening at home, the question was, gentleman here has an Apple IIgs with 3.5-inch drive trying to boot California Games Blockout. And on that machine, it does basically weird things, makes a bing, a noise, and then doesn't work. But the entire setup in a different 2GS works just fine. And the question is, why?
now, is this working? Now, does the 2GS that screws up with California Games work with other software? Do other disks work in that? Okay. In the control panel, do you have them both set to the same? Is like one set to slow and one set to fast? Because if you've got the can screw up the timing on on some of the disks if it's set to fast, which shouldn't affect 2GS software so much, but if it's got copy protection or something on that disk, that might be something weird. So I would check that.
Here in the front, yes. Yeah, so the question was, in some of the early Apple IIs, if you plugged the power supply in, you said to the wall or just to the board?
The power supply or what cable are you talking about?
Okay.
I think the question he's asking is, he's heard that if you plug cables in wrong, you could damage something, which is a really common problem on disk 2 drives that had that flat ribbon cable that plugged into the disk controller inside the computer. If you plug that in backwards or off a row of pins, you'll blow something up in the disk drive. It can actually damage the controller itself too. Wouldn't damage the rest of the computer, but that's not the point. Now, the Apple IIgs use D-sub connectors for everything, and they physically won't fit in backwards. You can't put them in upside down. You can't put them in the wrong socket. The only things that are close are the keyboard port and the serial connectors, but even then they won't fit.
I can do this one.
If only
I can
somebody,
do this
if only
one.
we knew somebody that knew something about the BlueScuzzy.
It's external. It's the DB25. The question was, I have an Apple IIgs and I have a high-speed SCSI card, and when I plug in, it's the external BlueScuzzy DB25 version. It does not work, and that's because if it's the high-speed card, it does not natively have SCSI termination power. So there is a way you can modify your card. You just add a diode, and what it will do is it'll give you the 5 volts on the proper pin, and then you don't have to use like an external power supply. Okay. On the high-speed SCSI card, there is no power that is provided through the SCSI port. So you can do one of two things. The first thing is you can modify the SCSI card, you add a diode, and what it'll do is it will apply voltage, 5 volts on the appropriate pin. The BlueScuzzy will see that, and boom, it'll just be powered through the port. Or you can use a external, like a cell phone style power supply and a micro USB cable and power it that way. I did that for a long time. I think that Eric Helgeson with the BlueScuzzy project actually has pictures out there now, at least maybe on the project page, on how to do that modification. But if you talk to Joe or I after the panel, we can get you set up. Yeah, because like DJ was saying, it could be a termination issue with that device and the chain since it's not powered. So
Yeah, I mean, since it's not powered, then there may not be enough power for the For the terminating resistors or something along those lines. I mean, if you have too much termination or not enough termination on a SCSI bus, then you basically don't have reliable or any communication.
I say go for the 10 meg profile. It's twice as good.
Bigger is better. Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, no. Sorry, I was.
Question is, can you reflash the 5 meg profile card with the 10 megs firmware and have it be able to read 10 meg disks?
Yeah, and the answer is absolutely. They're the same exact card. It's just the ROM is different.
I mean, the main thing is that the geometry of the disk is hard coded. So you can't take the 5 meg ROM and read a bigger disk that has a bigger geometry, but you can change what it knows about that disk by reflashing the ROM with the 10 meg version.
Anyone else?
Somebody want to give me a softball question about Macintosh stuff? It is. It's a little bit of cornstarch, and the itching will go away in several days. I verified. So the question was on the Duo disk, if you very quickly restart your machine like twice in a row, that it will destroy sort of the disk catalog at the beginning on drive 1 and render it unreadable, at least by Copy 2 Plus and other disk copy apps. But is the rest of the data unaffected, and can the catalog be rebuilt to access that additional data?
I mean, I know you already asked me this last night, which is why you're asking them. But
Maybe. Possibly. Don't do that. I think that's what the librarian at my grade school said. Don't do that. Just because it can destroy your data, and I'm not really sure how in 2024 how you get to a point where you could rebuild that catalog without like extensive knowledge on what's on the rest of the disk. What was your advice yesterday, Sark?
well, the problem is that the write head gets pulsed on for a short period of time, which means it's going to scribble all over wherever the head happens to be on the disk. So chances are it'll wipe out the directory track or wipe out whatever it happened to touch whenever it was writing. But
You know, whenever you first turn on or you do a reboot, you hear the drive go, that's the return to zero, so it knows where zero's at. If you happen to trigger that while it's stepping that back and the right amplifier gets turned on, more to I think what you were trying to get to with your question, wherever it's at, when that right amplifier blasts, it's going to essentially erase whatever is in that track, or even while it's stepping back. So some of the data on the disk could be damaged beyond that. But if you had been close to zero, you know, track zero, and you do that same thing, it's going to be exactly what you're talking about. It's not going to boot, it's not going to have a catalog, you know, or at least it's partially corrupted enough to where it doesn't work right.
yeah, it's like, you know, taking a big black marker and drawing it across a page of a book. I mean, data's still there, but you obscured it, damaged most of it. But it depends on how bad it was damaged. You might be able to recover something.
So the question, I think, is, you know, there was a situation, an old story where somebody had developed some stuff, but they didn't have a way to save it. They needed to put it on a disk. While the machine was still running, they came up and shoved a disk controller into it, and then they could do whatever they did. Yeah. So the big thing with that story, I don't know the details of the background behind it. I mean, it sounds like it wasn't booted off a disk in the first place. So then you wouldn't be in a DOS basic, so you wouldn't be able to actually save to it. But if you go into the monitor, you could write code to dump that into the disk. Yes, cards can be inserted and removed while the computer's in use. It's not recommended. If you don't do it just right, you'll end up shorting some pins. At best, you're just going to have the machine crash. At worst, something may actually get damaged, but it's kind of unlikely. The reason why I went ahead and grabbed up this question is because you were saying, is it possible to insert or remove, especially a disk controller, while the system's running? I don't know if any of y'all know what Diversidial is or was. It's a multi-user chat program that was run on Apple IIe's. A lot of stations out there, what they would do is they didn't want to boot off of a cassette, which is the way that they normally do it, because the way this works is that you've got 7 slots in your computer. You put a modem in every single one of the slots hooked up to a phone line. People dial in, and 7 people plus somebody on the console can all chat with each other. Well, it takes 3.5 minutes, if you're lucky, to load that software from cassette. And anybody who's loaded stuff from cassette on an Apple II knows that you probably need to do it 3, 4, 10 times before it actually loads successfully and you got your volume and your tone knob set all right. And if there was a power outage and you're trying to restore your services, you don't want to do that. Anyhow, that sets us up for, they would boot off of a floppy, pop the floppy out once it was running, pop a modem back in, and then run with the system. So yes, it is possible to remove and insert cards, but it's not recommended.
Now, I have some personal history about that. I tried to do that with a Disk 2 card, and half of my hair fell out. So maybe, be careful.
So the question, is that the 3.5-inch drive or the disk is stuck inside? Well, I mean, it's certainly always possible to get something that's stuck out. I mean, 5.25-inch drives, I've seen them get stuck where the mechanism just gets jammed or broken and it won't come out. A really common fault is with the 3.5-inch drive where you put the disk in and then it won't come back out again because there's a little tiny gear in the eject mechanism that's broken. These days there's 3D printer files for it, and the home 3D printers, DJ's been able to print them, can do them now, with at least with the high resolution resin printers can make those gears. Another problem with 3.5-inch drives specifically is the lubrication. Even if the gear is okay, the mechanism is all gummed up with old grease. And even trying to use a paper clip to eject it sometimes doesn't work because the mechanism is so stuck. And in that case, you have to take the drive apart. But they can be repaired.
And just kind of as an aside on that, since he brought up the gears and stuff, I have about 50 or 60 of those gears that I printed out. They're up in the repair room. If y'all have 3.5-inch floppies that have never had that replaced, it's going to eventually blow up. So, if you want to get it replaced or if you got one that's dead and won't, the symptom behind that is like you hit the button to eject it and it goes and the thing never comes out. The original nylon gears, they get brittle over time, and like he was saying, when the lubrication gums up, it's just requires too much torque of that thing, and it self-destructs. He and I have been running them on our 3.5-inch drives, and I think Javier has a few of his drives running them, and we haven't had a problem with the replacement gears yet, but yeah.
Yeah, the earlier replacement gears I used to get from Shapeways, and those work pretty well too, but the ones he's printed work great. What kind of resin is that you're using? Just regular, whatever the Elegoo printer uses for printing?
No, I think I actually used like Sunlu orange trans opaque, or I can't remember. It was just a standard opaque resin. I had bought it for a different reason because I thought it was a different color than what it actually turned out to be. It was more yellow than it was orange, and I was trying to do something that was orange. Orange is really hard to do with a resin printer because of the way light works.
Ironically, the gears he managed to print look exactly color matched to the old gears that crumble.
It's like, the nylon gears were originally white, but over time with the grease and everything else, they end up turning more yellow. When we, what was that, Joe? I didn't hear you.
It's like cheese gears.
Cheese gears, yeah. So when last year, when Sark replaced the gear in his primary 2GS just proactively, we noticed that the one that he pulled out looked almost exactly the same color as the ones that I had printed. So I took like 5 or 10 of them, maybe a little bit more than that, including the original gear, put them on my hand and walked up to Javier and said, can you spot which one is the original? And he looked at it for a little while and picked up a couple of them and looked at them, and then he goes, finally, he's like, this one. He was right, but it took him that long, and he's seen enough of those to know.
I just thought it was funny because it was an accidental color match.
Yeah,
You didn't even
no,
try.
I-
It just happened to be the resin you had.
I'm not going to use this, let's try it.
The question is that how often does something fail on a 2GS motherboard that would cause it to boot up for about 30 seconds and then stop? Now, when you say boot up, you mean it was actually loading from disk for 30 seconds, or it was like just kind of coming up, getting to that sliding Apple screen, and it would lock up? Yeah, no, it's. I mean, if it is a hardware problem with the machine, I mean, the 2GS motherboards I found to be incredibly reliable. You almost never see a failure with the board itself. I've had some bad RAM chips. I've had a bad IWM that may have been my fault. In general, and I've somebody here this week had one with a really crazy fault that I'd never seen before. But generally speaking, the 2GS motherboards are incredibly reliable. I would tend to lean more to like a memory expansion problem, dirty connections between the RAM card and the system, bad power supply, noisy power supply that's glitching out whenever you put load on it. I mean, certainly you have to run diagnostics, right? Run memory tests, go through and check the individual parts and figure out what's going on with it. But occasionally, I've had to replace the memory chips on the motherboard of a 2GS occasionally. It's not a super common failure. And if you run the control open Apple, solid Apple reset, if you run that diagnostic, it'll go through and test the memory. It's a pretty basic memory test. There's a better one out there, the Mega Memory Tester 2GS, written by Jeff Weiss. That's a really good memory tester. There's a bunch of others that'll be more thorough. But no, I actually have had to replace those chips before, but
Did
not
you
common.
say if you had experienced this issue without any expansion RAM in it? Yeah. So just with onboard RAM as well? Sure.
yeah, I mean, it could be power supply instability. Also, you said it happened after you removed the CPU and plugged it back in, right? Yeah, it could be the CPU socket. Like those original sockets are kind of delicate, and I don't know what kind of pins the Apple Squeezer has. I've never seen one. Does it have the thick square pins on it, or does it have like thin round ones? Because I know one problem, like there was a product many years ago called the Pet Vet for diagnosing Commodore pets, and you take the 6502 out, you plug the Pet Vet in, and it would basically replace the RAM and the ROM. The machine would run. You could figure out what was wrong with it. Problem was, if you used that and then went to try to put the original CPU back in, it wouldn't work because the Pet Vet pins were so much bigger, they had destroyed the CPU socket. So, yeah, I mean, it could be any number of weird issues. Like, what were you booting off? Were you booting off a floppy? Or were you booting off of a hard disk controller? Because it could be a problem with the storage. It could be, there's so many things that could be going on here, too. I would tend to lean toward maybe the CPU socket, especially given the circumstances, but I'd have to see it. No, I've recapped a bunch of SE30s. I said, you asked if I'd recapped SE30s?
Would I? Or have I? Yeah. Has the machine worked when I was done? No. Because kind of like our friend Steve says very often, all of the fixable SE30s have already been fixed. So I would say that, yeah, it's a recap on an SE30 is absolutely going to probably be required in this day and age. But the chances of success, if it hasn't already been done and hasn't had the battery out, really, really low. It just seems like those machines are just very, very weak. Thankfully, there are SE30 reloaded boards out there in our ecosystem now that if you are willing to put in the work, you can transfer your components from a donor board to the new boards. And I know that people have had a lot of really good success with that. Machines that were basket cases that were not able to be revived kind of in their original state have been able to move the unsourceable chips over to a new board, and that machine has new life. That said, it's still an LC2 with 128 megs of RAM. I'm not sure how sacrilege. I'm not sure how great an SE30 really is. I know people love that machine. It's okay. It was a great server machine for a long time because a business would buy one of those and they would basically park it somewhere and run Apple Share and turn the monitor all the way down and just forget about it. And guess what? All those machines look like that and act like that nowadays. So a reloaded, try a recap. If it doesn't get you where you want to go, there are people out there. Will with KMac Vintage or KMac, is it?
It's KMac Vintage.
Okay, I got it right. I know that Will does a lot of that type of stuff. He's got that special mind. That's got the patience to do that type of work. That would kill me all the bird shot on the back of that. But yeah.
But in general, yeah, the SE30, as with most of those Macs from that era that have that leaking capacitor problem, they need to be recapped. Like, even if they work right now, the sooner you recap it, the best chance of success you'll have. Because if it sits there and corrodes, the problem is that fluid that leaks out of the capacitors is corrosive. It'll eat away at the traces. It'll wick under the chips. It'll make a real mess of the board. The sooner you can clean that up and get those old capacitors off there, even if you just, if I don't have time to work on a board, but I see it's leaking, I'll just take all the capacitors off, wash it, and then rebuild it later. Just the sooner you get that corrosive crud off the board, the better. But certainly they're plenty fixable, but varying difficulty depending on how bad they are.
And Sark's 100% right about washing the board. It's because there's a lot of times that you can recap the board, everything looks okay, you do that round of cleanup with IPA, drink a couple of IPAs, and then you test it and you realize that it doesn't work or sound as bad, and you've got shorts under those chips.
Yeah.
And so the only way to really do it is like ultrasonically clean the board, or there are kind of community methods and
I just put it in the
accepted
dishwasher.
methods. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just put it in the dishwasher. But no, getting that crud out from under the chips is really important, and making sure it doesn't keep corroding too, because I see this happen on like Amigas and things where people will clip out the old battery, clean up what they see a little bit, and it works, and then just like the corrosion, the gunk is still under chips, and it sits there eating away, and eventually the thing stops working.
Or like all the people that have taken the clock capacitor out of their Xboxes and they were just like, clip, good enough. And then in 6 months, their Xbox is dead because it finally ate through the rest of the layers of the board.
So I guess what he's saying about replacing the capacitors on the SE and stuff is if it doesn't smell like fish yet, go ahead and replace them. If it does smell like fish, definitely get in there.
Yeah, the fishy smell is a dead giveaway. Now note that you must recap, it only really applies to things with the surface mount electrolytic capacitors, the little silver cans that leak, SE30, Mac LCs, that kind of thing. The original SE, the Plus, 512, 128, those don't have that problem. Oh yeah, no, you're right. The 2E card has them. Even the Super Nintendo has it. The Super Game Boy cartridge for the Super Nintendo. The Next Cubes. Game Gears. That's a different kind of electrolytic capacitor. It's that little sideways mounted thing, but still, it's the same kind of problem. There's a lot of stuff from that era. That whole fix it now or forever hold your peace.
I will say that recapping that Apple IIe option card is probably one of the most challenging recap jobs on any Macintosh. Forget the G5 iMac with its 50 caps. Those 2 caps on the IIe option card are just like Mount Everest. I'm joking. Of course,
I
I'm
don't
joking.
remember that being a problem.
No, it's not a problem. That's, yeah.
Been a while since I
It's
did
the,
one, but I don't
the
remember it being a,
simplest recap job.
that was a one beer problem. I mean, come on. Yeah, you want fun? Recap a next optical drive.
Yeah, the question was on the post-Intel Macs, i.e. the Apple Silicon Macs, what Apple II emulators will run on those? Chris Torrance's will. So, and he's a KFest alumni, so why don't you try out his?
Wait till tomorrow.
Sneak peek. Other than that, I don't know. So if these guys know, they can answer that question because I don't use emulators that much. Virtual 2 works.
So Virtual 2 will work fine on Apple Silicon or AMD. I've used it with no problem. What are some other ones? Does anybody else know? MAME, is that what you're? Okay. So Jay Kraft is saying use Ample, AMPLE. That's another good one. And then, like there are several of them actually that run just in the browser. So mine is one of them. Mine is Apple IITS. There's some other Apple, emulators that run in the browser, and those will work on anything.
What he's asking how you wash the circuit board? Well, I just throw it in the dishwasher. I put it in the dishwasher. Yeah, just use regular detergent. Oh, I use detergent. Yeah, I just don't use the heated dry. Or you could also just use if you just want to do it by hand in the sink, you can use Dawn dish soap, water, toothbrush.
The main thing on anything like that, I mean, water getting onto electronics is only a problem if they're powered on, usually, right? So the thing that you have to be careful about if you're using water and cleaning your board like that is that after you're done, that it's completely dry everywhere. Because like underneath the chips, it'll, capillary action and surface tension will keep it in there, and in between the pins inside the sockets and stuff like that. So what I'll end up doing is, as my last step after I've rinsed it, I'll dunk it into isopropyl alcohol, because alcohol is hydrophilic or hydrophobic, hydrophilic. Yeah, that's it. It wants to pull all the water out of that. So that gets a lot of that out. And then I go to an air compressor, or if you've got like compressed air can or whatever, blow it all out till it doesn't stop, till it stops, misting any water or you see any streaks coming down. You'd be surprised how much it can hold even after you think it's dry.
Yeah, and regarding cleaning boards with water, I mean, the only thing you really have to watch out for if you have incredibly hard water, mineral deposits. Again, rinsing in alcohol would help. Or distilled water. Get a jug of distilled water and use that as a final rinse. But regarding those washing circuit boards, when they make these things, when they were new in the 80s, when they made these things, they washed them to get the flux off. In an industrial board washer, which is basically just a dishwasher, but bigger and a lot more expensive.
What do you think about the idea of using sort of low acidic cleaners, like maybe Simple Green or whatever your local
Simple
equivalent
Green
is?
will work. I use Dawn dish soap.
Right, sure.
Whatever, Cascade Complete.
I've had really good luck with using like Simple Green or like whatever the Menards equivalent is, just because it is kind of got low acidity and it does seem to kind of break up stubborn stuff on there. We've got really like, our water is not the best. I don't know that I would necessarily do some of those other things, but it's good to hear experts kind of like say like, no, these things are good if you've got like the right set of circumstances and all that too. So
Yeah, no, that's fine. Simple Green works well. When I was rebuilding a lot of arcade monitor chassis, I used to wash them in the dishwasher, and then well, I'd take all the electrolytics off first because they're all bad and need to be replaced. I'd wash them in the dishwasher and then bake them in the oven to dry on the lowest setting with the door propped open a little bit to get them. Worked great.
And in addition to that, using the isopropyl and compressed air to dry them out is really good. One thing that I've done is, and this just happens to work for me because I have it in my house, is I have a dehumidifier, just a room air dehumidifier, and it blows air straight up. So I will just pop the board into that dry airstream, and in about 30 minutes, it is baked completely dry. You could also just put it in a sealable container with some those silica gel beads to suck a lot of the moisture out as well. And the cool thing of that is once the silica gel beads change color to let you know that they're used, you can bake the beads and use them over and over and over again.
Oh, and the air conditioner units at Rockhurst were great for drying boards on. No, I washed plenty of stuff in the bathroom sink and dried it on those air conditioners.
Yeah.
There was one year in the garage giveaway that there was an Apple IIe that was in there that somebody picked up, they put it back, somebody else picked it up, then the keyboard came back. And I grabbed the keyboard and I was looking at it and I was like, these keys feel really stiff. I can probably, fix that. I flipped it over and looked at the PCB side and it was just completely covered in dried soda. The entire thing, I think somebody had poured a soda into the keyboard. I washed that thing meticulously over and over again between hot water with soap and pouring some alcohol on it over and over again in the sink of the bathroom at Rockhurst. And then we put it on his air conditioner.
Yeah. Well, works perfectly now. Was that the same year I had the Apple IIe from the free pile that had the somebody had made a spider out of blue painter's tape on top of it because it's full of dead spiders. You couldn't even see the motherboard. Yeah, somebody had made a spider out of electrical tape or blue painter's tape on the top of it to signify this one has spiders in it. And sure enough, yeah, it's full of dead spiders. You couldn't see the motherboard. I washed the board, took that all apart. I washed all the boards in the sink of the bathroom, dried them on the air conditioner. We're fine. But try to avoid getting. Basically, you shouldn't wash a keyboard unless you absolutely have to. You don't want to get water in the switches if you can avoid it. But that one was, I think that one had already had 2 liters of Coke in it, so it didn't matter.
Well, I mean, it's also important to know what kind of keyboard, what mechanism it uses, et cetera. So like a membrane style keyboard, that's a lot easier to wash because whenever you take it apart, you've got to peel the membrane off of the thing. Whenever you start getting into, actual key switches, that's where what Sark's talking about comes into play because some of those can be, they're not supposed to ever get any moisture in them. So they may not have a plating on some of the contacts and then they start to corrode and it becomes much harder to revive that switch later on. And but in the case of this one, it was something from the garage giveaway. Somebody obviously practically threw it away a long time ago. It ended up here. Somebody adopted it, unadopted it, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a chance on this, and it worked out well.
So it's probably okay to go ahead and wash my foam and foil compact luggable.
I mean,
okay, what?
no,
I mean, you can only do it once, but
Well, I mean, if you rewash it, then you put new foam in it. It gets all the crumbs out of it.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I said no was because that's, first of all, if you had any of those foam foil discs that are still working, it would destroy them, but it's not going to actually fix it. You need to go talk to Kevin at Tech Select and get a set of those foam and foil replacements.
My opinions on power supplies are different than others. I just fix the old power supplies because they're a really good design. I just fix the old power supplies. I have not been particularly happy with the current modern replacements.
I mean, like there are some situations like what you're talking about that you can take an AT or an ATX power supply and pull the things that you need off of it and, jumper it to where it's going to work. One of the things that concerns me about some of the modern replacement power supplies that we have, they have so much more wattage output than what you need in a 2E or a 2GS. Because like the original 2E power supply, across all of its rails, it's only 35 watts. If you put a 300 watt ATX or a 500 or an 800 watt ATX in there and something goes awry with your 12 volt rail, it's going to put out a lot more than that 30 watts, and you're going to start vaporizing traces and stuff like that. And, you know, all these modern, all the way back to the 80s, switch mode power supplies have what's called a crowbar circuit in it. It's supposed to detect that it's shorted and shut it down. But if you have a dead short on something that can't take that much current, it may still shut down, but only after it's turned, you know, copper into vapor.
Well, and also you said you had stability issues with cards. Like what cards are you putting in there that's causing a stability issue with the original supply? No, the Slinky cards take a lot of power. The CFFA, not so much.
It may depend on what USB or CF card you got plugged into it too.
Yeah, that's true. One problem I've run into with 2GS is instability, especially if you've got an accelerator, a lot of memory, a lot of other stuff. The problem is less the power supply and more the traces on the motherboard. And adding like a reinforcement trace across the back for the 5 volts in the ground can help. Also the connector, making sure the connector is actually making good contact, because sometimes they're not so great. But the power supply itself, usually it's enough. And honestly, some of the replacements you see that are sold specifically for Apple IIs, they're not any bigger than the old ones were, capacity-wise. If anything, it might be a little bit worse on some of the rails. I just working on a 2E that somebody had that had a lot of weird problems because the minus 12 volts rail had failed on the replacement power supply. And that's something I've seen at the modern aftermarket. That's something I've seen multiple times with the modern aftermarket supplies, with the negative 12 volt supply failing, which on a 2E causes unsynchronized picture. The floppy drives appear like they're going to work, but they don't. Yeah, I know.
Another question.
Context.
We have time for one more question.
One more question? Yeah, so we had somebody else.
So Alps key switches do not clean easy. Like you can't get away with just dumping alcohol in and tapping on it like you can with cherry switches. There actually is a way to take those switches apart, and you can clean them manually. There are guides out there. People have gone into great detail on how to take Alps switches apart and clean them and fix them. And you can do that without desoldering them. You can actually take them apart from the top of the board. It's just really, really tedious, which is why I try to avoid getting any liquids into the keyboard if at all possible.
Regardless of what kind of keyboard.
Well, yeah, but especially Alps.
Disk Authority has a lot of good information on how to disassemble those different keycaps. But they're not, if you have one that's absolutely destroyed because of some sort of corrosion issue, or it's just so super oxidized that even if you take it apart, you clean the, it's buckling, whatever.
Yeah, the little switch mechanism.
Yeah,
inside,
the switch mechanism. You can still find replacements out there, and just desolder and solder a new one in.
Well, you wouldn't find exactly the Alps switches that are used in the 2GS key or the 2C plus keyboard there's something special about them. They're not easy to find that exact one. You can get modern replacement Alps switches that drop in and work just fine, but they're not going to feel quite the same. So if you have like 4 or 5 dead keys, what I would do is just take like some of the number keys or some of the keys you don't use very often, replace those in the main keyboard area, and then replace the seldom used keys with new modern replacement switches. It won't feel exactly the same, but you're not like touch typing some of those keys, you know?
There is a manufacturer that makes key switches that are very, very close, not exact, but very close to the original Alps keys. The manufacturer is called Matias, Matias, and I believe they're based in Canada.
Yeah, those are good switches. I mean, I've used a bunch of those.
And you just unsolder, they pop right back in and replace them.
They will feel a little bit.
They're a
they
little
are not
bit
the same.
They're a little bit less
but
less clicky.
Yeah, but
little
in
softer.
terms of functional replacement, they're fantastic. And I've had
Yeah.
keyboards I've just had to rebuild with those because they were too. Yeah, you can get those. You can get those Matias switches on Amazon, like $25 for a keyboard's worth of them.
All right, let's thank our panelists for doing a great job.